My name is Duncan Retson, and I'm the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister with the Science and Parliamentary Infrastructure Branch at Public Services and Procurement Canada. Je m'appelle Duncan Retson, je suis le sous-ministre adjoint associé de la Direction générale de la science et de l'infrastructure parlementaire du SPAC. Avant de débuter, j'aimerais prendre un moment pour souligner que je me rejoins à vous aujourd'hui de la capitale nationale du Canada, qui est située sur le territoire ancestral de la nation Anishinaabe-Algonquin. Nous exprimons notre respect à toutes les Premières Nations, aux Inuits et aux Métis pour leur précieuse contribution passée, présente et future à ce territoire. Nous reconnaissons et respectons également la diversité culturelle que les Premières Nations, les Inuits et les Métis apportent à notre pays. We would invite you to acknowledge those peoples in the regions where you are today as well. For the audience less familiar with Labs Canada, we're tasked with fulfilling an ambitious vision of creating a world-class network of modern multi-purpose federal science facilities to support collaborative research and innovation. So when I was first appointed ADM in June 2019, I was delighted to support all across Canada the needs of our scientists for this future. This initiative fosters greater collaboration between federal scientists that are doing similar types of science. And to that end, our journey has already begun with a focus on 5 themes or science hubs: the Atlantic Science Enterprise Center, ASEC, the Cultural Heritage Science Hub, the Regulatory and Security Science Hub, Terra Canada Science and Innovation Hub, and Transportation Safety and Technology Science. And joining me today for this dialogue is Dr. Fred Wrona, who I think you'll agree shares probably a greater energy and enthusiasm than I do for this initiative. He's a professor in integrated watershed science at the University of Calgary and previous chief scientist and assistant deputy minister of the Environmental Monitoring and Science Division for Alberta Environment and Parks. Fred a plus de 30 ans d'expérience dans le domaine de la recherche environnementale et de l'établissement des liens entre des politiques scientifiques au Canada et à l'étranger. Il a travaillé avec des communautés autochtones, des universités, plusieurs niveaux de gouvernement, des organisations d'intervenants et le secteur privé. Fred joue un rôle primordial dans le soutien de l'ambitieux mandat de Lab Canada, qui consiste à renforcer la science fédérale au Canada, et nous avons eu, lui et moi, de nombreuses discussions sur different points. Fred, would you like to tell the audience a little bit about your journey and your role here as Senior Advisor for Labs Canada?
Well, hello, Duncan, and hello, everybody. It's an honor to be present, and I want to thank you for the invitation. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge with respect the Luwunjan people on whose traditional territories the University of Victoria sits. And I'm currently coming to you from Victoria, and it's also the traditional lands of the San Jesus Esquimalt and Wasanic peoples, whose historical relationship with the land continued to this day. So it's an honor to be here. And certainly the journey that started me on this process was probably over a 30-year period. In 1982 is when I finished my PhD at the University of Calgary, and I was on faculty there for almost 10 to 11 years, and subsequently left and joined Environment Canada at that time, where I had a 20+ year career in working in a variety of program and areas, both as a research scientist, but also as a program manager and executive, where I was very fortunate through that process to actually get exposed to a variety of both internal programs to the federal government of Canada, but also internationally in a variety of areas where I was beginning to actually being asked to start looking at how do we build better science infrastructure, better science and collaborative programs. I was very fortunate to be asked to be the inaugural chief scientist for the government of Alberta and Alberta Environment and Parks over the last 5 years or so. And I've now left that position. I'm currently on faculty back in academia again at the University of Calgary. So with that, I've had I guess, a long journey in a way of being able to work in a variety of areas that I hope I can bring and help advise Labs Canada on their initiative as we move forward.
Well, Fred, speaking of that, when you think about your previous roles providing science advice, um, what would you say has been different so far in your work with Labs Canada? Like, what kind of science advising skills have you been drawn to use maybe the most often in working with us?
Well, I think it's a great question, Duncan, and I think being reflective of this, there's a number of things that come to mind. First of all, is advising at a very large scale, and what I mean by that is the scale and the program that Labs Canada is trying to build is both national and international in nature. Now, having said that, much of my career was dealing, sort of place-based, university-based, or department-based, and you were looking at collaborative networks and discussions of those. But the Labs Canada initiative is actually formally pushing forward on that agenda of how we better work together and develop the kind of world-class infrastructure that we collectively need to address both current and emerging science issues that from a federal policy point of view, but from very much so from a public good point of view. So what this has done for me is you're shifting from dealing from, and I've shifted from thinking about things that are more, like I said, place-based or regional in effort, and now looking at it in a much sort of inclusive family of organizations, many of which have slightly different mandates, they have slightly different perspectives, different governance systems, and how do we actually pull all that all together to actually advance the programs that Labs Canada is dealing with. The second thing is communication. I think one of the things is communicating what we're trying to do to a very broad audience, and not just the scientific community, but also the decision makers, but within which they sit. And also broadening it out, and I think one of the areas we might touch about on later on would be dealing with Indigenous communities and other organizations and angles and other groups of how they see themselves being part of this initiative and helping develop and grow that. So I guess looking at this, we're beyond bricks and mortar in my thinking. I know historically I always thought of public services procurement as a bricks and mortar organization and Labs Canada as such. And in fact, I think what's exciting now is it's thinking beyond that. It's an important core element, but we're actually thinking of how do we build it, and including the bricks and mortar, but also from a dialogue and governance point of view. There's no cookie cutter solution to this. There's no script or book on how we need to move forward. I think we're collectively trying to basically have the discussions amongst all parties involved to see how we move forward. It's a great learning exercise, but I think the outcome of this is going to be very exciting.
That does make me think, Fred, what you say about some of the experiences I've had visiting some of the legacy facilities that we're looking to replace in a new and different way, and thinking about some of the discussions I've had with the scientists and researchers who are working there. What we're trying to do, absolutely, it's a bit of a journey. It's about sort of developing sort of this future together. So sure, there's bricks and mortar, and then there's also digital, but it's a lot more than that. It's about talking together, thinking together, working together to figure out how we can do better and different together to support the researchers, which is why we're really pleased, frankly, to have some good quality science advice and perspective coming through the people we work with and through an advisory function and person like yourself. When I think about our long-term vision and plan, it was released last year, and it's based on, frankly, on the kind of principles you'd expect: some, science excellence, collaboration, diversity, inclusion, stewardship. When you think about those principles and what we're trying to accomplish over the next 25 years and beyond, are there any in particular that really speak to you? Like what do you think is the most, what speaks to you most about what we're trying to do from the level of principle?
Well, as a scientist, I mean, science excellence and collaboration and partnership is very, very top of mind for me. I mean, it's how I've built my own programs and programs for within federal and other and provincial and other organizations, is really to foster that. But I think one of the things that's beginning to expand in the way that we're dealing with this is it's not a matter of just having excellence. How do you attain it, and how do you sustain it? And one of the things for me is actually beginning to look at looking at the problem and looking at who we need to bring in to deal with the problem. So increased transdisciplinarity, increased multidisciplinary perspectives in terms of dealing with this, bringing groups together that normally never would have talked to each other before to deal with the problem. I think, for example, COVID was a very good recent issue that we've had to deal with, that has certainly taught not only the science community, but I think the public at large, both from a professional point of view and a layperson point of view, of how do we deal with something as dramatic as this? How does science align itself in the best way possible to inform the decision-making processes in a timely and credible manner? All of these aspects basically have us rethink as our current structure and how we actually organize our science community and our priorities. Is it the right construct? And of course, do we have the right infrastructure and laboratories and capabilities behind that machinery to actually do the work correctly? So that type of connectivity, the agility in that, the responsiveness of the system to both current and emerging issues, I think are really important for us to consider as we move forward. And of course, there's also the stewardship side of things, whether we're dealing with environmental stewardship or, very importantly, public stewardship in bringing our science and credibility to the public. One way to do it is basically to have the ability for the public to see science in action. Do our current facilities accommodate that? How do we better deal with that whole area? I think would be something that's very very apropos for us to consider. So collaboration, is a core element on all of this in partnerships, because I think we all recognize no one can do it alone any longer. The complexity of the issue and what we need to deal with involves a lot of groups and a lot of people. And I think what the Labs Canada program is certainly trying to build and foster is a new way forward in terms of that. And that's an exciting train to be on, so to speak, to see how this unfolds.
Well, I agree. I find it pretty exciting. I know you did too. And hopefully some of the folks who are watching this will as well. In hearing your answer there about what sort of excites you from the principle basis, what we're trying to do, it does strike me that it's sort of very much of these times. You mentioned the pandemic, you mentioned, the importance of public engagement, to understand, have confidence in, to feel connected to science. That makes a great deal of sense. You mentioned, the environmental stewardship, which is a pillar of what we do, resiliency, carbon neutrality, and in the work that we're undertaking here inside this program. That brings me to something you touched on earlier, which is sort of another important pillar of what we're working on, which is the idea of how do we work with, and also very timely, how do we work with Indigenous communities and stakeholders as we think about what does science mean, and what does it mean to equip scientists and researchers going forward. So one of the things that that's important to us in this initiative is the idea of incorporating traditional knowledge, very relevant to the scientific pursuits, from the more, I guess, Western traditions that perhaps more of the people in this conference may be familiar with. How do we do things like, braid knowledge systems together in a way to really to respect the traditions and the places and the peoples where we operate, and derive maximum benefit collectively from that wisdom, pulling it and braiding it within some of the more traditional approaches of the Western science stream. You've done a lot of this work in the past. It's been a part of what you've done, and it's been important to you. I know you've done that in particular in some of the work that you've done in Alberta. We're looking at how we incorporate this I'm wondering, for the benefit of those who are participating in this and in this session, what would you say to us about braiding of knowledge systems and working with these communities and these peoples where there are or should be intersections with science programming?
Well, I think you've raised a very important issue for us. And one of the ways I think we need to move forward is recognizing right from the onset that there's multiple knowledge systems and multiple ways of knowing in any of the scientific or areas that we want to deal with. I think having a broader holistic perspectives on the issue, and Indigenous knowledge holders, many of which of course have been and lived with their lands for thousands of years, and in many cases have a very strong tradition of understanding sort of the connectivity between peoples and the environment, and they look at it in a very holistic manner. We have and can learn very much from their knowledge of these systems, a way to look at the problem. We tend to be reductionists in science. We set hypotheses and we tend to reduce it down to testable ideas. Holistic perspectives actually looks at the system as a whole and the interconnectivity of components of the system. And I think that line of thinking is very critical for us to deal with some of the current and future challenges that we actually face as a science community in many of our disciplines. So one of the things that the CSPC is doing under Labs Canada is recognizing from the onset that having multiple knowledge systems as part of the design and the program development being done very early in its process is going to be a critical piece for us to move forward on. And so I know we need to engage early on and develop, seek the advice of elders, seek the advice of communities in terms of what we're doing, and they will help guide very much so and be part of building this new innovation agenda that we're trying to do under Labs Canada. It has to be an integrated part right from the onset in terms of how we move forward. And there are experiences across Canada now where this is being recognized more so, both at the university and government levels. But I think we, as an organization, and CSPC and also as Labs Canada, recognize that this is going to be an important area for us to continue to foster and develop.
Yeah, it's very true, Fred. It's a critical part of what we need to do here to try to make sure that we get our programs right, in touch with the times and people and places. And I really like what you say there about the broader holistic system perspective on things, instead of what can be at times maybe a little bit more reductionist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And siloed, very siloed. And I think what we need to do is break out of that. I was very fortunate to have two advisory panels when I was a chief scientist in Alberta. I had a traditional Western science advisory panel and a first Indigenous wisdom advisory panel that reported the minister and myself. And in fact, as we started moving forward, those panels actually were not two panels any longer. They became a very holistic, integrated entity that worked together in dealing with the problem. And I think ideally what we want to do is move in that way, that it's not very different worlds. We're all of the same, we'll have the same objectives, but we have very different perspectives of how we achieve those. And I believe having this multiple faceted approach is going to be critical for, for Labs Canada to move forward on. So Duncan, you've been asking me quite a few questions here. If you don't mind, I actually would like to ask you a question at the moment.
Okay, very good.
We're part of the, fortunate to be part of the CSPC conference. I've been involved in many of them in the past. And I know that they're usually they are very thankful for the support that PCSP has provided as an active member of the conference. I'm curious to know, what do you see as the biggest benefit from a PCSP point of view of attending and supporting a conference like CSPC? What do you hope this marriage or this interaction will achieve for PCSP?
Well, I'm hoping at some point we're going to create a new letter, because we've got a lot of PSs and Cs, and it's hard to keep it all straight. But no, seriously, for us, I'm a simple person in a lot of ways, as anyone who interacts with me will be able to attest. Labs Canada at its core is a program, and we've touched on this in the chat today, about collaboration and bringing people together to sort of step out of the day-to-day and think about, okay, what can we do that's a little bit different and better? It's rooted in what we're doing. So it's still about the science, but how can we work together? How can we collaborate and innovate and do better together by undertaking it a little bit differently? And how can we create some infrastructure that actually enables and supports and encourages that even? Well, this conference is about bringing people together out of their day-to-day, drawing on that rich experience that the scientists and researchers bring forward to it, but stepping out of the day-to-day and thinking about what it is that we're doing individually and collectively. That's what Labs Canada is about, kind of at its best too, and helping enable and facilitate that. So that's what I hope to be able to do, is to engage people in these kind of discussions and these kind of thought processes, so that we can do a better job of what we're trying to do with the federal science community. Not just more of the same, but actually engage in good discussions, do smart planning, and chart this course and deliver it together. So the policy conference is about thinking a little bit differently and stepping back and, what are we doing and why are we doing it and how are we doing it? That's kind of at the core of our DNA as a program. So to us, it makes a lot of sense to be here, to try to be a part of these discussions, and to observe, learn, participate, and engage with this community in where it's trying to go and how we can work best with the community to serve its needs into the future.
Well, that's great. And I'm actually, I would suspect that throughout the CSPC days, there'll be many new questions and many new issues being discussed. And I'm hoping that many of those will actually help further inform the kinds of directions that Lab Canada wants to take in its program. So it looks like an ideal fit, Duncan. So I'm looking forward to the conference and the outcomes of this.
Yeah, me too. Our whole team is very much. Well, thanks very much, Fred, for taking the time to chat, and to all of you, thank you for taking the time to listen, to tune in, and to learn more about Laboratories Canada. Merci à vous tous d'avoir pris le temps de nous retrouver pour en savoir davantage sur Laboratoires Canada. Merci.
Merci. Bye-bye.